just give it a moment for the attendees to populate.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're just giving it a moment here. We've got participants still arriving, so we'll give it about 1 more minute before we begin. Okay, the time now is about 5 minutes after 4, so we'll get started. Good day, everybody, and good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from this evening. My name is Jamie Campbell, and I'm the Manager of Alumni Engagement, Annual and Legacy Giving here at Georgian College, and it's my honor to welcome you to the call today. Before we do begin the call, we'll begin with our official Indigenous land acknowledgement. Georgian College acknowledges that all campuses are situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe people. The Anishinaabe include the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. Georgian College is dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. So on behalf of the Georgian College Alumni Association, our 90,000 proud Georgian graduates around the world, our executive council, and our proud Georgian grads that are on the call today, I want to welcome the students to today's session. And just to ensure that you are in the right place today, I just want to confirm that today's panel is to support students in the Computer Programming 2-year, Computer Programming and Analysis 3-year, Interactive Media Design Web 2-year programs. So if you are meant to be on the call today, welcome. If this is the wrong call for you, we certainly have other opportunities coming up and we welcome you back very soon. So today's session is being recorded. For those of you that are on the call that wish to watch this again later, we will record it to support future learning as well for you. And before we go any further, I'm going to take an opportunity to welcome the graduates that have joined us today. We want to thank these 4 Georgian graduates for their time of being with us here today to share their knowledge and experiences with you and to help you with your program learning outcomes. So first off, we have Justin Sheik. Justin graduated from the Computer Programmer program in 2017 and is an associate full stack engineer with WCAG subject matter expert at Manulife. Welcome, Justin. Thank you for being here today. We have Virginia Barlow. Virginia Barlow thoroughly enjoys creating and building new things. She will never stop learning how things work and has consistently pushed herself to explore different avenues of interest, including health sciences, pharmacology, fine arts, computer sciences, 3D printing, and more. She is enthusiastic and creative with the ability to adapt to her surroundings. Her love for sharing knowledge gets her excited about teaching, so every workshop is filled with passion. She's now working as a digital transformation specialist for the Henry Bernick Entrepreneurship Center at Georgian College. Thank you, Virginia, for being here. Next up, we've got Michael Joyce, and some of you may have read Michael's story recently in our Georgian View Alumni magazine. So Michael is a business solutions consultant at Traction on Demand. He graduated from the Computer Programmer Analysis Diploma program in 2017 before completing his Bachelor in Computing degree thanks to the articulation agreement between Georgian College and the University of Guelph. He's worked in development, project management, and consulting roles in financial services and e-commerce, and now works primarily on the Salesforce platform. And our 4th graduate today is Chris Naismith. Chris is a senior FE engineer working at Jane.com, an online e-commerce marketplace. And although primarily working in web technologies such as React, TypeScript, and JavaScript, his technical experiences also extend to back-end native hardware. Chris also organizes the North OT Tech Meetup, hosted previously at Georgian College as an online moderator for Toronto JS and engineering coach on Mentor Cruise. So those are our 4 graduates, and there's a lot of knowledge, a lot of skill, and a lot of experience on the call today for our students to learn from. I won't take up too much more time because I know you're not here to listen to me. What I will say before I log off the call today and hand things over to Jessica and Aaron is that on behalf of the Alumni Association, I'm happy to share that we will be making a donation to support a student scholarship in honor of our 4 graduates that have joined us here today to support our students. So thank you everybody for being here, and all the best to you for the rest of this conversation. Over to you, Jessica and Aaron.
Thank you, Jamie, and welcome students, welcome panelists. My name is Jessica Lovett. I'm the Director of Co-op Career and Experiential Learning at Georgian, and it is my absolute pleasure to join you today for this event, to learn a lot from these graduates. And so I'll just give you a sense of how the next section of this event will go, and then we'll just dive right into it. I have right in front of me a list of our learning outcomes that are associated with your work term credit and some questions. I'll kick off the conversation by asking 1 or 2 questions for the panel to answer. And I'd like to encourage you, participants on this call, to please use the chat function to put in your questions that you would like us to ask the panelists as we go along. We're really looking to you to drive the conversation forward. So I'll get us started. But then really look forward to Aaron's help in picking up those questions out of the Q&A section. And if you're not sure where that is, if you hover over the bottom of your meeting window, you'll see the Q&A. You click on that and drop in your questions. And Aaron is just calling to your attention that location as well. You can also use the reactions and you can raise your hand and we'll also look that way. If anybody would like to draw attention to themselves, although you won't be able to come off mute if you're a participant in this meeting. So please do use the chat box in order to ask your questions. All right, I will ask a first question for our panel then, and it's around the types of ways that we can develop, test, document, deploy, and maintain secure program code based on specifications, but within a remote environment. I wonder, panelists, if you can please tell us a little bit about some of the tools that enable you to work collaboratively when you're working with remote teams on program code. Does anyone want to kick us off?
I think we're all too a little polite to go first. I can go
you
first.
You win, Justin.
Yeah. So some of the technologies we use at where I am currently, especially for remote work, a lot of the items have online portals such as Jenkins pipelines that's used for product deployments to prod to higher environments. When it comes to teamwork management and that kind of stuff, we use online portals such as Jira, which is similar to Trello, if anyone's used Trello. It allows you to keep track of stories, keep track of what everyone else is doing, as well as take notes on those items, which everyone on your team should be able to access. We use Microsoft Teams and Slack for general communication. And really, those are the main ones that we use. There are other things like SonarQube for testing and a couple other platforms, but those are the main ones you hear about when you first join our area.
Does anyone else have anything to add there? Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah. So at Jane, we use a lot of like similar technologies that Justin was mentioning. We use like Slack and Zoom for typical day-to-day communication across team and just for one-on-one work. When it comes to more like collaborativeness, you know, we use GitHub for our source control. So we do like pull requests through GitHub, reviewing code, all that sort of stuff through there. And then we have a lot of Slack integrations. So Justin was mentioning like Jenkins for one. So if we have any sort of pipelines that end up failing, it will automatically send a Slack notification so that people can be aware of it. Something else that we use at my work, forgetting the name of it because it just changed. It's called Splunk, which is an on-call system. So at my company, we have split into different teams. So we have front-end teams, back-end teams, infrastructure teams, et cetera. And each person of that guild is there's like an on-call rotation for that team. And then there's also an on-call rotation that's a direct on-call. And so we use that for being able to manage incident reports, stuff like Datadog and Sentry for being able to do error tracking. There's tons of tools that are out there. And quite honestly, depending on the company you go to and the tech stack that you use, it will change, but a lot of them are fairly similar.
Yeah, we use a lot of the similar technology as well where I'm at. So Slack and Zoom, like your day-to-day, you're probably spending all of your time with those windows open, just for that actual collaboration work with people. And then when it comes to actually working on a product, I'm in a little bit of a different situation than from some of the other panelists on here in that I work in the Salesforce ecosystem, which it has a lot of kind of proprietary separate processes that are different from something like, working full stack with like open source standard languages like JavaScript. So we use a DevOps tool called GearSet. DevOps, again, it's similar as Chris and Justin had mentioned. When you think of Jenkins, it's taking those changes from a development environment and pushing them into production. So that's what we rely on there. And yeah, honestly, working in consulting, you get exposed to more software as well, because a lot of times you'll have to adapt what software you're using and what communication tools you're using to fit your client's needs. We don't use Microsoft tools within our own kind of in-house work, but if a client is dedicated to Microsoft, everything that they do is in Outlook and Teams and like DevOps Azure, that's what we have to learn to adapt to.
Sorry, one other thing that I had forgot to mention is with a lot of companies that use the Atlassian products like Jira, another software is Confluence that people will use. Typically, that's more for like, long-term storage of discussions rather than chats that happen over Zoom or Slack that will disappear over time. Confluence is more like a, kind of README. And if you organize it well, you can find information as well. That was one other thing I forgot to mention.
Yeah, I was actually going to hop on that as well with the Atlantean or Atlantean, whatever, software line. When it comes to other stuff, I also forgot to mention we use AKS and Adobe Experience Manager. If you're going into stuff like React and component-driven development, a big thing that people are using now is it's similar to Adobe Experience Manager, just basically component-driven development from a platform online.
Virginia, anything to add to that?
Well, through the makerspace, we use Discord, so we can have our Discord channel out there. So it's nice, open, but it's for computer studies students and web development students to come and hang out while we're remote for the now. But then through Georgian, we use things like WebEx and Zoom and Teams, depending on who's more comfortable with which one you're more comfortable with. That's where you're jumping to. So I think what has been noticed here is basically, if you're going to be using it, even if it's an if, learn how to use it so that you can just jump right onto the bandwagon and figure it out.
Well, that's a great tip for everyone to keep in mind. I was going to ask how you would recommend students prepare for a career that would have them working in so many different tools and technologies. Any thoughts on that before I throw to a question that's come up in the chat?
So a comment on that for me would be, it's surprising how many languages are actually fairly similar. By learning the basics that Georgian taught me, so we focused highly on Java and HTML, CSS, the mean stack. The mean stack stuff is what threw me into the web development scene, and it taught me enough of what I needed to know to be able to learn from there. Now, in saying that, you don't have to be an expert from day one. A lot of the places that you get after school know that you're wanting to learn and they're willing to teach you. That's kind of why they're hiring someone at your level, is to teach you and make you become the model employee, at least from my experience.
Yeah, I would say, like, if anyone is concerned about there being like too many different portals or systems to use. Really, the main thing is that you'll often be introduced to them one by one. And this is a part of like a good hiring process done by both like HR, but then also in that development engineering organization. And some different departments use different tools. So HR might not even have context to certain systems that engineering would. And really, I mean, yeah, when you first graduate, the expectations typically are fairly low. Not in a bad way, but it's one of those, you're not expected to be an expert on day one. And a lot of these tools are fairly beginner friendly, and they can get more advanced as you start to get into more advanced stuff, understanding the code base or, documenting different stuff. It typically you will have someone that will help you through that process. So you won't be expected to figure it out on your own.
And if you do use any of those tools as part of your learning, for example, in anyone who's in the 3-year program, we had a year-long project and we were using actual project management tools. I think we're using Trello, other things beyond that, GitHub. One thing to keep in mind is know what that tool is for and know a couple of different alternatives, because you're going to run into questions during your first interview, something like, have you ever used Bitbucket? No, I haven't used Bitbucket, but I have used GitHub. And from what I understand, they're similar. If you can speak to just knowing what a tool is for, that's going to score you points in an interview.
And if all else fails, jump on Skillshare and get yourself a subscription and just figure it out. Just figure it out on your own, because that's what I've done for a lot of my stuff, and it works.
I still do that for a lot of my stuff.
We have a few follow-up questions in the chat. So Nay Takar asks, when having multiple projects in to-do list, how is the approach, like tackle one at a time or start simultaneously, and how is the work distributed?
That's my favorite thing. So for my, I'm going to say it's going to be how you work with your work for starts. Like, so if you are someone who likes to really focus on one thing and get that thing started and done, then dive right in. But the best way to do it for myself, I have my own whiteboard that I put up, and I have it mapped out. When I was going to school, I had it mapped out by days when things were due. And then I would have days where I would be able to do stuff. So giving myself the time to know, okay, well, I'm really good at JavaScript, so that's only going to take me like an hour or two. But I'm really bad at Java. That's going to take me like 4 hours, probably a couple days. Put comments in your code if you're going to be separating it between, a day, a couple days, just so that you know, hey, I left off right here and I was doing this. That's how I sort of work around that little problem.
So I was maybe reading this question a little bit differently, but so that people are aware, I've worked at a couple different companies that have been larger and some smaller. And, in some cases I've worked on where there is one development team that is working on multiple projects at the same time. And that one is usually you have some sort of like project manager who is balancing everything. They're responsible for timelines and making sure, hey, this is coming up and so on and so forth. In regards to my current company, we have multiple teams and multiple products that we work on. And with that, each team is responsible for their own product that they're working on. In this case, I work on the actual marketplace of Jane. And so the to-do lists are specific to each team. So you're not necessarily needing to worry about those other teams. And it depends, like I said, on the company that you work at and the structure. But what I have found to be useful is if you're going to do something, do maybe 1 or 2 things per day. When you take a break that's for lunch, maybe that's when you switch over to the other thing. But if you constantly keep switching between things, you're going to get nothing done rather than at least getting one thing done.
Yeah, and just a comment from there to go a little bit deeper with the way Chris was talking. I have been at bigger corporation most of my career. And the way we do it is the whole multiple teams, multiple products aspect. You own one item, but underneath that, when it comes to the to-do list aspect, you'll learn these things if you haven't taken the class already. But in I think it's the second year, there's a course for where you learn business practical items. So agile methodologies, waterfall, all of that. Most of the companies I've talked to use agile methodologies, and what we do is every day we have a sprint stand up. Once a week or once every 2 weeks in a sprint, we do sprint planning, which people then volunteer for an item on the to-do list. To know which ones are more important, there's a priority that gets set to them during another meeting. So that's kind of the way that works, at least where I'm from. I'm not sure if a lot of companies do it that way, but that's just the deeper dive on Chris's comment.
Thanks, guys. We have a couple of other follow-up questions. Great. Nate Takar says that we've answered their question. So thank you, guys. Jennifer Mendez Chen asks, with remote working, how do you keep your team motivated and make sure the line of communication remains open?
I could go on for a while. Does someone else want to go first?
I'll go. So this is something that, I mean, I've done remote work even before COVID happened. And really what I have found is there's a lot of things that are bad sometimes about communication remotely. And the main thing that you have to make sure is that communication lines are open. And this can be, having Slack, being able to jump onto a call. And when you're in an office, and you see someone that might be, say, spinning their wheels on a problem, especially when you are more junior, you might have a task and you're spending what you don't realize is an unreasonable amount of time on it. And if you were in an office, someone could see you struggling and be like, hey, let's work on this problem together. But when you're at your home, no one has that context. So unless if you reach out to someone, people aren't able to help you out with whatever it happens to be. And when it comes to having like efficient communication, what I find is having a good relationship with your team that you're working on, whether that's company wide or maybe just more to your team that you're working with. And at Jane, I mean, about once a month, maybe every 2 months, like we'll play like a Zoom game for like an hour and a half. And it's ways of being able to build that relationship with your team, being able to be trusting and knowing that you can ask questions without feeling judged. Because I mean, there are tons of things that I don't know, and I don't feel embarrassed to admit that. But sometimes there is this concern that you might not be able to answer something that you feel you should. So just reaching out and being as communicative as early on as possible is really what I find.
Yeah, there's this cool Slack app that some organizations have. I'm really lucky that the one I'm at right now has, called Donut Pals. Basically, it picks a random person in the company and it sets up a Zoom call between you two at some point in the future. So it's a really good way to get that social aspect. Another thing is, like, if you have any questions about someone else's position, we're likely all going to be working more on the tech side. If you have a question like, hey, what does a corporate lawyer actually do for the company and how does that affect me? Reach out to them. A lot of people like to talk about what they do every day, and it's a good way to form a connection. Just don't be afraid to reach out to people, even if they kind of have scary titles. Feel free to reach out to people and learn more about your coworkers, because as much as we all want to reach out and talk to people because we're all going a little stir crazy in our homes, everyone else is too.
Good point. Anybody else want to join in before we move on, or?
I'll go with Chris, where he was saying that we do sorry, the cat's touching buttons, where we will do games during our work meeting, or we've changed it up and moved our work meeting from Zoom to another location online somewhere. So a virtual space that we can all have an avatar and run around a little special world, made it sort of fun for us and exciting to to get together with everyone in a new and different way. So that was really exciting for us to be able to like keep it together. Also, a mad amount of memes between friends. I know middle of the day, just send something to someone that you might know and be just to cheer them up. You know, maybe someone's having a rough day, their schedule's blocked completely. Just send them something that might cheer them up for a few seconds. It definitely helps me out, and I know that it helps the other people who I work with and our team to sort of brighten the day.
Yeah, and sorry, not meaning to keep jumping in, but what I would say is there is no right answer to this. Like each team, and even at Jane specifically, each team that we have, and we have 5 different teams, we all handle communication differently. And how we kind of do it is we actually had an official meeting where everyone talked about like what are the times that we operate, because Jane is 2 hours behind. They're in, I guess that would be mountain time. So they're 2 hours behind. So we are only able to communicate between 11 o'clock and 3 o'clock in Eastern time, just because of time zones and stuff. So what we have found is just being very clear on how we want to communicate, what are the effective ways. And as long as everyone is aware, that also helps out. So, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Justin.
No, good. That was a good comment. When it comes to my situation, we've done a lot of the same of every single one of these. Just another one to add on there is don't be afraid to go out there and just talk to your teammates. I've made multiple social channels just to get the team talking. And a lot of the time, a lot of the developers out there are introverts. I am very much introverted, but I know how to be external when I need to be. For example, I a couple times before COVID hit, I cooked for my team. I would do a bunch of stuff ahead of time, cook in the morning, and bring it in at the lunch period, and then we'd have a party all afternoon. It was just a way for us to decompress from the quarter that we were just going through. When COVID hit, I adapted that by doing a cooking show, essentially. I told them what to all buy. I threw up 2 webcams in my kitchen and I cooked along with them. And this idea spawned because I was a cook for 10 years before I joined Georgian College and became a programmer. So you just take those experiences and basically humanize yourself. Look at how someone else is feeling in a day and reach out to them if they need it, that kind of thing. You're not just employees in a company. You're a team. You're a well-oiled machine.
Some great advice. This one's semi-related. Jasmeet Kaur asks, how many different departments work in your company? How do these departments cooperate together to ensure efficiency? And what is different during the pandemic? So some of it you might have touched on a little bit, but I guess predominantly it's like interdepartmental relations and cooperation.
So from a Manulife perspective, I don't know if I could give you an exact answer on that, because just in Canada, we have 35,000 employees. In our sector, let's use my individual sector under group benefits. We have 4 sectors, and under each sector, there's about 10-ish teams. In between each sector, you have their communication, their groups. A lot of the times there's a team level, there's a group level, and then there's a sector level communication. And then on top of that, you then have the people who own the entire area that have bi-weekly or monthly, what they call AUAs, so ask us anythings. This allows you to ask literally anything to your bosses, as long as you're not afraid to, because obviously there are some things you just don't want to ask your boss out in the open. But it allows you to get those questions off your plate. So that's kind of the biggest way we communicate with those people. On top of that, though, they have open door policies. Almost everybody in our company has an open door policy where if you have a question, you message them. So you even remotely just say, "Hey, how's it going? How's your day? I don't know you, but how you doing?" Right. So that's how we do it at our area.
Yeah. So coming from consulting, one of the big departments is sales, and then the other big department is delivery, and then there's the smaller department that's shared services. So basically, the way shared services works is they kind of provide all of that underlying infrastructure that we need. I'm in delivery, so I'm grouped into one of, oh wow, I don't know how many different teams, but we've got these teams of about 30. We've just recently hired our 1,000th employee, so things are getting a little bit hectic. I can't remember all the names. But similar to what Justin was saying with kind of that big sort of group discussion where you can ask whatever, we'll have what they call town halls. And it's basically every single person who works in a delivery role gets to join and they get to ask any question, no matter how tough it is. If it's a really tough question, you can ask it anonymously. And then kind of another piece of that is Salesforce operates in a bunch of different verticals. So I'm in financial services. There are things like nonprofit organizations, healthcare and life sciences, high-tech industries. So think like actual kind of what you would think of when you think products. And there's a big encouragement that, hey, if you're interested in any of these other verticals, one, feel free to reach out to anyone. Two, go through our internal library of here's everything we've ever done about a nonprofit org. You know, let loose with your free time and go read about these different areas. So you can definitely kind of see how everything's structured. You can learn more about different projects that might have been done in the past. You can, if a particular project really sparks your interest, you can always reach out to the person who worked on it and you can ask them any questions. So there's a lot of different matrices and ways you could cut it all up. But really at its heart, it's very flat. Like there's no issue if you want to send a message to the CEO and say, hey, I had a question about this. It'll take a while to answer you. He's a busy guy, but he'll answer you.
Does anyone else want to comment on how the departments work together in their areas before we move on to a question?
So in my department, I work for the Henry Burdick Entrepreneurship Center at Georgian College. And then within our bubble at Georgian, we also have the research and innovation section. So we're sort of smushed together. So it's RIE. We keep up to date. Every 2 weeks, we have a meeting and everybody gets to share what their teams have been working on for the past couple weeks and how our teams have crossed over. Let's say I did a bunch of video editing for the RIE team and the RIE team did a bunch of in-kind forms or something like that for our side. So we get to keep each other up to date on what's going on. And it's just part of having a really good team that we're able to share and have a good team leader to make sure that sharing is happening so that everybody's sort of kept up to date and understanding like what are we doing.
Yeah, and I would say for how departments work at Jane is, and you're not necessarily in like one department. It's kind of like a really messy Venn diagram. Because specifically what I'm on is I'm a part of the front end guild, which is all the front end developers, because that's what my specialty is. But I'm also on what is called the conversion and retention team. And that's a vertical team that's responsible for the Jane marketplace. And then also under that umbrella, I'm a part of the engineering organization, which is a wider umbrella that covers more. And as Virginia said, I mean, we do across the engineering org, we do 2-week sprint demos where each team is able to demo what they've worked on for the last 2 weeks if they have anything to demo. But then we also have a all hands meeting, which is every Thursday, which is company wide. And so my company, I feel, has done a good job, especially during COVID, of being able to open up those channels of communication and in different ways. And I mean, then you also have meetings that are specific for different levels of management as well. So we have like the SLT, which is the senior leadership team that is able to meet and share across the different departments. And then you also have an EMT meeting, which is more stands for engineering management team. And that's again for each guild that can share any sort of like problems that are happening that are either guild specific or seeing if other guilds are also running into those issues. And specifically, if anything's changed during the pandemic, I can't speak for anyone else, but I have no idea. I joined this company during the pandemic, so this is all I know.
I also want to just mention that for anyone who sounds like who's listening to this and feels like it's overwhelming, don't worry. When you join a company, you aren't just thrown into the deep end with the sharks. You are gently lowered into the water with the sharks.
That's a nice way to put it, Justin. Team, maybe I'll just jump in with another question for those on the call who are interested in interactive media design. So, Chris, maybe this is one that we'll start off with you, and but open to anybody who'd like to share. The question is around what strategies a web designer or a developer should use when they're working collaboratively with other designers, developers, or stakeholders. We're talking a lot about collaboration, which is why I thought this question might be interesting to ask. Like, what should those web designers or web developers keep in mind in order to effectively create web projects with all of those stakeholders?
Okay, that's a great question. So basically, it's how did the process involved in creating web projects. And at my work, we have a design team that's right now is made up of 3 different people that design for 5 different teams. And we use collaborative tools. One of the ones that we use is called Figma, which I like to compare it as Google Docs for Photoshop, which is maybe a bad, but it's a collaborative tool where multiple designers can build prototypes and high fidelity mockups that can be given to developers. And the tools that are in Figma allow the developers to usually ask less questions around, what should the font size be here? You're not going in dark. You have an idea of how it should work. But there is a lot of really like that's a really big question, because I think Jane itself is still trying to figure that out. As teams grow and as new members are introduced to the team, velocity, which is like a metric for how much output a team has, usually goes down. And trying to figure out how to have a high performing team is not something where you can just twist all these little gears and now it's good to go. It's something that you have to tweak over time. And what worked, 3 months ago might not work today. But what we do is we just constantly evaluate, have different meetings, which is probably the most boring answer, but really it's a lot of meetings to discuss, are we doing this the right way? Is there a better way to do it? Or are we doing it because this is how we've always done it?
Thanks for that. Any perspectives from others on the call who've probably been involved in some of these projects from time to time?
Standards,
Honestly,
if there are you want to go first? I'm going first. Okay, I'm going first. If you luck out and you're working in a organization or on a piece of software that has standards, that's the easiest way to figure out kind of, are you designing it correctly? You can definitely still challenge those standards, but it does give you an idea of like, here is what the best practice is that a bunch of other people in your role have sort of kind of synthesized. So within Salesforce, there's a Salesforce Lightning Design Standard. And it's basically a specific UI standard of this is what our software looks like. If you are creating something that will kind of plug into this software. Here's what it should look like if you want it to look like it's natively part of our software. Apart from that, if there is, a client that you're working with that has their own design and branding guidelines, adhering to those. Again, my role is a little different in consulting because a lot of it is a client knows what they want and we have to adhere to that. So it definitely simplifies things versus, a software project like Chris would be working on. But if there are at least some guidelines you can go by, whether those are official or they're just laid out by likely your marketing department, they probably have brand guidelines, any sort of things like that to keep in the back of your mind. And then if you do deviate from those standards, you can at least have, a discussion about, yes, I know this is the standard way of doing it. I did it this way instead. Specifically, here's why. And that can be again, I hate to say it, but it will be another meeting that you can have.
And just before Justin jumps in, you brought up a really good point, Michael, is usually there's different types of systems that are set up for this. So at work, we have like a design system that is made by the design team. And then we have a component library that adheres to that design system, but is like puzzle pieces that engineers are able to reuse. But then there are also other things like guidelines for code quality. So how code should be written, the way that it should flow. That's other things that places will sometimes set up. And a lot of that comes through in tooling, various tooling that you'll install on your computer as time goes on. And you brought up a good point there, Michael.
Yeah, actually, Chris, also you hit it on the head there. I was going to talk about content, the can't think of the word now. The dynamic content pieces where basically it's all created ahead of time. All you have to do is copy and paste the same thing 3 times and it all looks the same. These companies, especially ones, my size or even I guess Chris's size, I didn't realize they used them, but basically they do that so that way there's uniformity across the design. And a lot of the times, at least if they've looked into it, these items are also AOTA tested and all of that. When it comes to guidelines to follow, there aren't just internal guidelines you need to follow, and that's why I mentioned AOTA. That's a government-based structure that you need to follow in order to be compliant with a B2B site. So you kind of learn these things over time, and again, it's not something you need to learn right away, but when it comes to the company you join, they'll inform you and they'll catch you up to date on what items they have at their disposal for you to use.
Thanks for that. I think I'll move on unless Virginia, you wanted to add any thoughts. Are you good? Okay. So thinking a little bit about problems in any given project, can you describe some tools or resources that programmers could use to help troubleshoot problems when they seem to be at a standstill? So you hit a roadblock, you're not sure what the solution is. What are some tools or resources that are good go-tos to keep in mind when you hit those standstill points?
So in my situation, a lot of the time it depends on the technology you're using. So if you join a company and it's based out of JavaScript and React, you can use the React Dev tools. A lot of the time, most of the framework tools have documentation around it for you to use to debug it. Redux has its own dev tools built into you can get for Chrome and Firefox. So really any major framework that you use will have its own dev tools, and I would recommend going in that direction. JS hints another one, as Virginia said in the chat. Use your syntax highlighting. That's a big one as well. You can get items like ESLint and SonarLint, which hook up to your company's SonarQube and ESLint packages, and will highlight items that don't match the company standards, don't match global standards, etc.
Thanks. Any other comments? Chris or Michael? I saw Virginia gave us the thumbs up, so you're good with that?
Yeah, pretty much. Again, Salesforce, a lot of it is proprietary. Basically, there's two ways you can develop a feature in Salesforce. One of them is called Apex, which is actual code based off of Java. And then the other method is what's called Flow, and it's basically an automation design system that Salesforce has implemented. Apex has its own out-of-the-box debugging tools, and then Flow similarly has a debug mode, and you can see basically, again, the flow of all of the data from the database to user input to back to the database again, and see kind of what the values are at each stage. Yeah, debugging tools, it's 100% your first stop.
I'm going to go maybe a little bit of a different path, but what I would highly recommend is source control as a good first step. And oftentimes, when something's not working, it's because we're either trying to write something new or something that is already existing is not working. And the easiest way is just delete stuff. Like, as long as you have a safe environment that you can go back to, because like when I first started off, I always wanted to write new because I was super excited and I was like, think of all this new stuff that I can build. It'll be great. But that's not necessarily true. We have to maintain a lot of stuff. And when stuff is existing, there's nervousness around touching it, changing it, because now it might not work. And there's two things for that. One, you should be totally okay as long as you can go back to what the original thing is, re-downloading the repo off of GitHub, or truly just, reverting all the files locally. But the other thing is like testing also helps with this. So unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests are things that give you confidence that when you change something, you didn't break it. And when it comes to like debugging, I mean, there's sometimes simpler is better. You can use debugging tools, but in the case of like JavaScript, you can just throw in a console log and see, did it even get to this section, or did it end up hitting like a, it's in a try catch and it ended up erroring. Find what works for you, but there's tons of different tools, and it is very specific sometimes to what you're working on. If you're doing Java versus C# even, and how similar in syntax they are, the tooling is different, and there's no one fits all answer.
And just to go off of that, when it comes to, sorry, Virginia, when it comes to that, my mentor always said one thing to me. He said, if you can't use those tools, console log the crap out of your code. Get an idea of what exactly you're looking at under the hood.
I agree with that. I do have to say that I will use JS hint quite often when I'm doing JavaScript, as my first things are, where did I lose the semicolon? What did I spell incorrectly? And what was this supposed to be doing, and what was it supposed to be connecting to? So I have to go back through my patterns and be like, okay, I'll leave myself code notes in my code that says, exactly what it's supposed to be doing, so that if I'm coming back to it, or if it's somebody else's code, or someone's coming to take a look at my code and being all like, oh, well, let me help you with this, and they come and look at my code and it looks like spaghetti, having some notes in there are a really good idea. And your teachers will probably, push on the code notes as well. But for me, that's something that helps me for my future problems, because I break everything.
I love it. So when we talk about breaking things, I think maybe it was Chris who also mentioned maintenance is really important. So can we talk for a minute about some common database maintenance tasks that should be performed when you're working on something as fundamental as a database?
I think the first thing is just making sure that it's up to date is kind of the big thing. So I guess for transparency, I don't usually deal with the database. We have database administrators at my work that are responsible for that. But when it comes to like a lot of maintenance work, it's setting up systems that are reliable and being able to prove that they are reliable. And so in my last answer, I said, testing helps with that. Testing can help with this, where, the back end has a bunch of tests that are set up where you can have stuff like, like as simple as like the response code that comes back from an API matches what's to be expected. But you can even do stuff like how long a response takes to come back. So what's your, 90th percentile, 95th percentile, and get a good idea of what is some of the worst case scenarios, because as systems get more and more complex, there are edge cases where stuff can balloon out. Most users will get, say, 0.5 of a second response time, but 3 users are getting, 30 seconds, and that's not usually acceptable. So sometimes it's just, in this case, as being a junior, it's probably passing it up to someone who has more experience, but being able to identify where pain points are and figuring out, do we need to add an index to this column in order for it to perform queries faster, or using a different technology or an addition to the technology?
I should add, if not everyone works with databases, maintenance of any web app would also be interesting for people to hear, if there's anything standard from a maintenance perspective that might be helpful for the students to think about.
This kind of ties into the databases. Essentially, Salesforce is a platform as a service, which means a lot of the actual database work is handled by Salesforce. It's not handled by the people who are using the platform day to day. But one thing that you generally want to keep in mind is, if for some reason some sort of database update or query is taking a really long time to load, it's likely something that you've implemented recently, if you're just noticing it now. But again, like Chris was saying, have previous versions accessible of all of your organization's code and configurations. But basically, if something is taking a really long time to load, it just means I need to take a look at how that specific logic is actually accessing the database, and if it's accessing it in a way that doesn't really kind of make sense and isn't performant. So one of the things that we always look for is like, are you calling the database from within a for loop or something like that, where you're just going to lead to a bunch of issues because you're making all those calls you don't need to, when you can store it in one collection and push that. So generally, if we notice a database issue, it's really something that exists on the logic side, and we need to take a look at the logic. I guess a similar sort of thing that you could take a look at if you have your own in-house databases is things like indexing. Is there data that you're accessing really frequently? And is there a way that you can make that data more performant to access?
Hey, thanks for that. I think Aaron has a next question here. Is that correct, Aaron?
Yes, sorry, I was muted. Yes, we have another question from Natakar. What would your personal recommendation be for some courses when there's a million options available and you can't figure out a particular interest? It's a great question, I think. So many courses.
So I'm assuming that when you're referring to millions of courses, that you're referring to like online and not just offered through Georgian. But yeah, I mean, there's tons of different things that are out there. And in part, I mean, if there's something that is interesting to you, just take it. Especially when you're a junior, what I have said to people who I've mentored and people who I've worked with is like, when you're a junior, every resource is a good resource because you don't have that knowledge. So if it's like a Udemy course or a YouTube series or, a webcast or something, like just do it. Like, what do you have to lose? And especially with how accessible a lot of content is nowadays, it's also typically cheap. You can pick up a Udemy course for like on sale for like $15, $20 with hundreds of hours of content. And not to say that it's great to buy stuff and not use it, but you can kind of pick and choose from it what you want to learn, and then kind of, theoretically throw away the rest of the course. So what I would say is, like, if there's something that you think interests you, just do it and try to pursue it. And if you might find out through that pursuit that you're not as interested in it, versus, a higher risk of going and taking a job that specializes in that and then realizing it's not for you.
Yeah, I completely agree with Chris. As myself, I have the attention span of a squirrel when it comes to actually trying to find something that I enjoy. I would do what he said, just find one thing, try it, move on if it's not the one you want. For me, it was gaming. I love to game. Would I love game design? I didn't know, so I went into that. Look at what you enjoy outside of class. If you did want some recommendations that weren't just, watch the first thing you see, the CS 50, which is a live streamed course of computer science from Harvard, I would recommend. One thing that you're not going to hear a lot is taking the computer science after our courses. It is something that comes up sometimes. It is not a necessity. So that course on YouTube is a very good resource. And the other one I would say is Git. Take anything with Git. There's a couple good ones on Pluralsight. Really good teachers on there. YouTube has some good ones. Those are items that are used kind of all over the place. Git's kind of the overarching version control you see everywhere. But overall, find that interest and just take something you think you'll find an interest in. You'll know when you don't like it because you'll get bored. You'll start, thinking of what you want for dinner, that kind of thing.
I guess my only recommendation to add on to these awesome responses so far is, if you find that a lot of these tech courses aren't really exciting you, go ahead and take a course that's not computer related at all. Do something like, I don't know, creative writing, learn how to do songwriting, learn how to cook. I know a guy who was a chef for 10 years before he came to Georgian, who does classes apparently. But just do something that kind of keeps your mind engaged. I don't know if everyone else on the call feels this way, but I've found, since starting a full-time job where I'm in front of a computer all day, I shut it down at 5 p.m. And I get out there and I do something outside. And if you can go and learn something that's a nice little break from learning about computer studies, I always find that when I do that and then I come back to my computer to write some code, I'm definitely a lot more energized and invigorated.
I just have to, I love what you just said, Michael. It's so important to give yourselves a variety of different learning experiences. And when you do that, you may find you encounter ideas and concepts that spark other connections in your tech or your computer-based program. So there's a lot of just good stuff that comes out of different specialties and ideas and people mixing together. Virginia knows a lot about that in the makerspace. There are ways that the college can support you in exploring as well, different ideas and disciplines, and connecting with different people. And if in doubt, if you're really feeling stuck and not sure how to go forward, there's a whole team at Georgian Career Success team that will sit down and talk with you about your whole career path and different ways you can spark opportunities. So just know that we're in your corner as you take those steps and explore those things.
And I'll just add to that. Just remember, there is lots of free stuff out there. There are people who want to show you how to do stuff. They have a skill and they want to show you how to do something cool. I know I am definitely one of those people. And I will, if someone's like, hey, Virginia, I need to know how to sew. I'm like, okay, let's learn to sew today. And when we were in the makerspace, I got some of the students on the sewing machine to fix and mend some of their clothing. So they learned how to do that while they were at the school. They fixed their backpacks, they fixed a pair of their pants. It was fantastic. What did they also learn? How to sew. Was it meaningful? Absolutely. Are they going to use that again in the future? Maybe, maybe not, but it was something that they were able to do that was outside of their regular scope. They were really excited about being able to do the thing and learn it. and then complete something. So just pick something small and, you know, complete a painting, or go through a vanilla JavaScript tutorial and just learn the vanilla. And then if you want to do extra, learn all the extra, learn React, learn everything. It's super fun to learn. That's my jam.
Yeah, and Michael was kind of alluding to this in Virginia. You mentioned it, like, don't feel like you have to learn everything, because I'm going to tell you this, there's one, technology changes so quickly that by the time that and not to be discouraging, sometimes you learn something and it's not relevant by the time you go to use it. But at the end of the day, there are so many specialties that are out there. Like I mentioned, I don't do database stuff. Like I don't know anything about it. So if you really are interested by databases, you know, you could go and take a course on it. But if that's not where you're interested, you shouldn't feel obligated to pursue courses, and like you shouldn't always feel like you have to go and learn these things, because at the end of the day, like you learn a lot of these skills on the job, you know, both in like college, in your co-ops, and then after graduating, you know, on the job. And you know, you don't feel like you have to do these courses. It is a way that you can set yourself apart, but there is also burnout that could come with that. And, you know, you want to have a healthy level of knowledge without feeling like, I can't manage all this.
It's okay to focus on your required courses and take something fun in your gen eds. Yeah, that's a really good point, Chris.
When it comes to burnout, I agree, Chris. Like I've had wicked burnout on and off for the last year, and that's actually one reason why I'm moving positions currently. So that's something you got to keep in mind. When it comes to Michael's comment about if you can't find something you enjoy, do something else. You know, go for a walk, or sorry, in Virginia, just as an example, you know, you can do crafts, get into stuff like this. I bought a circuit that's literally sitting right there, or Cricut, or whatever the hell it's called. But all of this stuff spawned when, actually, funny story, Chris and Michael, yeah, there you go, basically showed me the makerspace. These two were part of a group that actually pulled me into being a maker. And because of that, that spilled over into my life. If you, yeah, like, look at that. If you have a passion, or if you want to find one, doing this stuff outside of school and outside of work will keep you motivated, will keep you wanting to do more every day. Like this is just sitting on my cabinet over there, but I use it every Halloween to scare the crap out of people. So like there is a use for it, but it's only once a year.
I think we should talk about this question I have on my list about creativity. So I think we're there. So let's just go where the conversation is taking us. So, and this shows up as a learning outcome for interactive media design, but I think it's relevant for any program that you're in at Georgian. Can you talk a little bit about the ways in your careers in which you needed to show creative and critical thinking techniques, and just specifically reference that either to the work that you do in computer programming, or if you can, and you have some web design experience with that, to work you've done in web design. So the question is, in which ways will you need to show creative and critical thinking techniques in a web design or development position?
I think one of the keys, and one of the things I find really useful, is forget the technology. Think about what it is that you're trying to do with a program, with an app, whatever it is. Think of what you're actually trying to do, and just forget about what it is you're building it with. And then have an idea. You know what I want to do? I want to buy a book, or I want to read a book, something like that. That's all you're thinking. And then from there, it becomes a lot easier to determine, all right, well, if I want to buy a book, where am I going to buy it? What do I want that to look like? How do I know that I've actually bought the book? Like, how do I know that it's actually in my cart? Things like that. Starting with the end goal in mind, and then just kind of forgetting about whatever the patterns are, can sometimes be a really good way to brainstorm. There's definitely like value in having patterns and standard ways of approaching an e-commerce site or something like that. But if you're just kind of like hitting a wall and this task seems really big and I have no idea where to start with it, just start with the end in mind, I think is what I find the most helpful.
For myself, I would have to say wireframing. I like to give a good wireframe for whatever it is that I am going to be building, whether I choose to do that wireframing with code or whether I choose to do that wireframing just hands on paper, just drawing it out. I have a bachelor's degree in fine arts, so hands on paper is my go-to. And I will draw out what I think, homepage is going to look like. And I don't add colors. It's not about colors. If I'm using colors, it's just to say this is where this type of content is going. This is where that type of content is going. It's not about the design look at first. It's about the functionality and the user experience. Get that down and then build on top of that and be like, all right, what is our color scheme? What is our logo? Like that stuff comes secondary. Even if you have it in your mind, have that black and white or that, text box content blue sort of thing going on before you jump into building an actual website. Make sure that you have your user experience down because that's going to keep people on your page. And then build your make it beautiful and add your creativity and make it nice, because coding is inherently creative. You are building something from scratch. You are building something from nothing. So you're being creative just with a wireframe.
Thanks for that. Any thoughts, Chris or Justin?
No, you guys hit it pretty much on the head for me. Design is probably the hardest thing. I tend to be, I say I'm a creative person, but again, with the attention span of a squirrel, you don't really get very many decisions off. So that's probably my hardest thing I got to overcome personally.
Yeah, for myself, because I'm a front end, I work pretty heavily with our design team. And when there's a new feature that's shown to us, we have these sessions where we ask questions. And a lot of that is going over, thinking critically about, well, how does it work in this scenario? Because oftentimes a design is usually pretty flat. It's one dimensional. You don't understand, well, how does this work when I hover here? Does this animate in from the left? Does it animate in from the right? And what you kind of have to think about, and some of it comes with experience, which is never a good answer, but you start to think about, well, how should it work in this scenario? How should it work in that scenario? And really some of it might be, as I mentioned earlier, just asking those questions that you might be nervous to ask. Everyone else in the room might be nodding along, but really there's probably someone else that going like, I don't know what he's talking about. He's showing me this design, but I have no idea what it does. And just ask questions, ask for clarification, because you might be asking questions that no one else has thought of for a feature. And as Virginia was saying, I mean, code is very, it's sort of like, it's this hybrid between, you can type characters on your terminal or in your IDE, but there's an art form to how you have code flow. And, anyone can type characters, but as for reading it, code can tell a story. And how you kind of write that story, I mean, it's a cliche, it's up to you, but it's true, because every person does write code a little bit differently.
I have kind of sorry, did somebody else want to add? No, I have a kind of a follow-up question from Mitty in the Q&A. When building an application based on knowledge of coding, do you go step by step with coding concepts on the process, or do you picture what you're building with code all at once? So I think you touched on it a little bit, Virginia, but maybe a little bit more.
I just mentioned that wireframing process, which is basically breaking it down into the most basic thing. So it's not going to look beautiful, but you're going to know what things are going to do. So start do a word cloud. When I do the maker night on this wireframing topic, we do a word cloud, and we think of all the things that we want to have in our website, or the list of things that you're being told from your professor or from your boss to have in the website. Like, we need a nav bar, we need this, we need this, we need this, and then start implementing those things. But build it out first before you jump into your code, so that you know where you're going with it. And I think Chris will probably, since he's front end, he'll know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I would say if you jump into coding first, that's a problem. And I think it is something that oftentimes is seen by people who are beginners, is you feel like, I can just jump in and solve this. And what we do at work is we'll be given a problem that's usually from management or something, and it goes through a process where design tries to like think it out, and it's hashed. Honestly, at my work, it's usually hashed out behind closed doors. I have no context to the questions that are asked and whatnot. But when it gets to the point of being built, some of those questions have been asked, but they can be re-asked and things change. And so if you start trying to build something, you first kind of have to understand, like, well, what are we building? Because if you jump in with the code first, it's going to change. I have built things when it's done and it's not done. It changes as I'm building it. And, you kind of have to have systems in place to either try to prevent that or be able to mitigate some of it. But if you need to have a good understanding of what you're trying to solve. And so Michael gave an example of e-commerce websites where, there's traditional standards of how an e-commerce place works. Usually, you have like a details page and you can add it to the cart from there. Some places have a buy now option. But as for what happens when you click add to cart, some places maybe there's a modal or there's a drawer that slides in, and the actual implementation of how that works is unique. But you kind of have to think of, well, what way do I want to solve this problem? And if you jump into it first, it's much harder to solve it on the fly.
I think we're sort of, there's a question that might on our list that I might ask now, just because it's following out of some of the conversation. And it's this: if you could each describe one real world problem that you might solve with code, or that you have solved with code during your career, or perhaps it's going to be an example of a problem that you tried to solve with code but needed a different fix. If you could give us an example of a real example from your career so far, and then using explain how you would approach solving these problems through code, and the methodologies specifically that you're using as you attempt to solve that problem, or did attempt to solve that problem. That is the question. I hope I didn't garble it too much. Panelists, who'd like to take a first shot at that one? Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I'll take it. So an example of something that was recently done where we solved it through code, which is everything that I do because I write code. But we made a new homepage at Jane, and that was the solution. What the problem was is that we had new customers that had no idea who Jane was, and they landed on the website. And what it previously was is you had an advertisement banner, and then it was just products. And there was nothing where someone landed on Jane and they understood who Jane was as a brand. So we ended up building a new homepage and using feature flags to see, we would segment the users. So half the user base got the old homepage, half the user base got the new homepage, and we looked at the analytics that was there. And what was nice is we could justify that this new homepage was more positive in understanding our brand, because we had marketing sections that explained who Jane was to anonymous users, people who have never visited the site before. And then we had different sections that were for people that were returning users. We were able to like personalize the products that they saw versus a static list of products. And a lot of those problems came again from just issues that we had in the business. How do we increase the revenue? And how do we have users that return on a regular basis. Maybe a normal cycle is they return once a month. How do we bring that to 3 weeks? How do we bring that to 2 weeks? And a lot of those were solved in part by the homepage, making stuff more relevant. But it was a lot of like collaboration back and forth at being able to solve that problem.
Thanks for that. Does anyone else have a problem that they solved through code that they'd care to share a little bit about?
Yeah, it's not as exciting as it wasn't part of the actual job, but during my time at Manulife, we realized that we used a tool called a retro board, and this was from funretro.com or whatever it was at the time. They actually locked it behind a paywall at one point. So that was a problem for us where we didn't want to have to spend, $5 per team in just a Northern American part of the company being 35,000 people. So what we did is we actually went out and designed our own. Actually, I did. Used it as a side project to also learn new code technologies. Eventually, I brought in 2 of my mentors to work with me on it, and we used agile frameworks, including we had our own stand-ups and all that. And over time, it actually was shipped to Asia about a month ago. So now it's being used over worldwide. But that was a problem that more than just our team was seeing. And if you think outside of the box, you can actually become the solution by thinking about like, well, why don't I just make our own? So that was kind of just a quick story of where mine would have came from.
I wish I had as cool a phrase as "become the solution." But one thing that we dealt with at my prior employer was getting tax documents to our investors in a timely manner, because previously these were mailed out, which is really difficult to do when only one person can be in the office at a time because of COVID restrictions. So it was really an entire kind of interdepartmental collaboration to get files that existed on an FTP drive to our own servers to this customer portal experience that we had on the Salesforce platform. So I actually did get to do a little bit of coding, which I don't do a whole lot of anymore, with some PowerShell scripting. If you're looking for fun courses and just like messing around with stuff, PowerShell scripting is a good one to learn. But basically through that, we were able to get those documents automatically from one location to another. And these are kind of in locations where an API wasn't an acceptable solution, just with the size and the sensitivity of the documents. So that's something that we were able to kind of collaborate with and integrate with a number of different systems from a number of different organizations.
Oh, we got the thumbs up from the panelists. Awesome team, thank you. Okay, any questions in the comments or the Q&A, Erin, that we should throw to?
The most recent one that I was just going to do, I see Justin answered in the comment about different websites that have sample projects to practice and learn more for web designers and developers, but also feel free, I think, for coding or computer programming as well. If you guys have any other recommendations, maybe that's one better added to the chat, because a lot of them are websites and people can copy and paste them. So yeah, we can probably move on from that if you guys wanted to add those to the chat.
Something I would just say, this is usually true in a lot of scenarios, is if you type in awesome dash and then something, you'll usually find a lot of examples that are related to that. Typically it'll come off of a GitHub repository, but you could type in like awesome dash TypeScript and it'll be a lot of examples of TypeScript resources, anything from blogs to projects to example code, all that sort of stuff that's out there. And if for whatever reason, if you're trying to find something specific and you can't, like, reach out to me. I'll try to find it for you.
Yeah, that goes to me as well. All the stuff I post in the chat is from just, perusing the internet in my free time for stuff that I want to do. He's right though. Like, if you just Google what, awesome dash, the way I've been doing it is I just say awesome JS projects, or, like something really simple that I can get ideas from is kind of the way to go. If you were to look at my Git, there's nothing on there, but that's because everything I've done since leaving school is NDA owned by the company that I work for, mainly because they use everything I own. That will happen. All of those ideas came from places like that.
So I just took a solid note. Awesome dash anything. Cool. Thank you for that. So I do have another question here on my list, and I guess I'll throw it out there. And if you have a better question to ask team on the panel, feel free to take that in a different direction. But the question is this one: what criteria do you use when you're assessing the requirements of a web-based project? What criteria do you use to assess those requirements?
Usually, so from a personal standpoint, I kind of make up the criteria from the very beginning on like what I want to hit with this idea. But from a company standpoint, those are usually set in stone through either the team or through your product owner, depending on what we're talking about. If it's what the product wants to be, that's done by the product owner. If it's how the team's going to hit those items, like testing has to be a minimum of 80%, that kind of thing, you do something called a definition of done, or a team agreement to say, I will never push code that is X, Y, and Z. I will always hit X, Y, and Z percentages and values. That way you keep a standard going, and then you can use tools like ESLint, like I mentioned earlier, for syntax to allow for commonality in coding, because everyone is going to code differently. Some people may like semicolons, some people may not in, say, JavaScript, but you need to come to agreement on, hey, we're going to use semicolons, or hey, we're going to not use semicolons. ESLint will allow you to then save, and it'll automatically format that kind of stuff. So that there's a tool for that kind of thing, but from different perspectives, it depends on where you're looking at.
Yeah, what I would say is to the point of like Justin's example of semicolons or not semicolons, requirements for that from like a coding team is usually pretty minor. I mean, if the code works with semicolons or it doesn't work with semicolons, like if it works with and without, then doesn't matter. And oftentimes there's someone else who has made that decision already. When it comes to actually like requirements for a web project, so whether that be like a specific feature or more like a greenfield project, usually a lot of that is, sessions, like I was mentioning before with meetings, where you have members of different parts of the business. So you have people that are product people, you have people that are designers, you have people that are back end, front end, maybe DevOps, I don't know. And being able to figure out, one, who is going to be, like, typically your team designates what you're responsible for, because I'm not going to start writing backend code, but what parts of the area, how that team is going to solve that portion. And then, you can do, we've already mentioned before, but both like Trello and Jira are great ways of being able to create, you can create a story that documents a specific requirement for a feature. And depending on the scope of the project that you're working on, you can have everything from like an initiative, and then an initiative has epics that are assigned to it, and epics have stories, and stories have tasks, and tasks have subtasks. Like, there's a lot of like breaking down that you can do. But sometimes things don't require that much nitty gritty detail. You can sometimes get by with just a story. And so really, how do you like end up assessing requirements for a web project? It's communication. I never would have thought that the most important thing coming out of being like developer, engineer, coder, whatever you want to call yourself, isn't the code part of it. It's truly the communication and working on those skills at being able to sometimes not even, sometimes people come to you with a solution and you try to find out the problem, but sometimes the problem that they're giving you isn't even the problem. Like sometimes people will say, we need to build a new homepage because engagement on the homepage is too low. And it's like, is that the problem or is there a different problem? Is it that maybe the products that we have on the site are not what people are wanting to buy and they're going elsewhere? So there's always like different problems that are there, and trying to uncover the hidden problems and discussing how to fix those is really the most important thing through communication.
And that plays on my comment from earlier on. If you're gonna, when we do one-on-ones with some of the students, we will comment on any advice on communication as well, because we want to make sure that you guys can ace those meetings and those calls.
That follows in perfectly with the next chat question I have, which is probably the one track question we always get about hiring. So maybe we can elaborate a little bit on this and talk about some of those essential soft skills as well. But the question is, how are hiring approaches for intern or even full-time people in comparison with pre-COVID? And how do you find out where your application is lacking or if it is? I think maybe tying that into some soft skills or some different things that you can do for students who are now entering the workforce or will be entering the workforce.
Yeah, so I don't. Sorry, I'm going to go first, just because I literally just did this process. The biggest thing for me when I first joined Manulife pre-COVID, like 3.5, 4 years ago, I got lucky. There was no testing involved. It was literally, hey, how's it going? What are you interested in? And are you willing to be trained? And that is the one question that I got constantly is, are you willing to learn? Obviously, there's only one answer to that. Yes, I'm willing to learn. I'm an open book. I want to mentor. I want to be as good of a developer as I can be. Show motivation when you speak to people, and it will, even if you're like me where you kind of stop for a second to think every time you go finish a sentence, they don't care about that. They just want to see that you're motivated and you're happy to be there. Nowadays, at least when you're in a little bit of a higher level, I don't know if they do it for juniors or not. Interns, I'm not sure either, but they usually give you a small little quiz just to see where you're at. When you're in the whiteboarding version of it, when you're sitting with somebody, or in this case, remote over a call, you don't have to get the right answer. That's what people seem to forget, is you don't have to say, oh, this is how you're going to get that, and then code it in front of them. All they want to know is that you can think out your process. So something I did, for example, the job that I just accepted, I didn't get the answer, but every step I took, I was like, okay, so first we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and this is why we're doing that. That's what they want to see. They don't care about, we know how it's supposed to work. We just want to see how you work. Now, in saying that, they did go into some of the stuff that I mentioned with computer science, but it's not deep diving. You can see this stuff just from looking it up online and learning in your free time. A lot of it is how to use arrays, how to use strings, how do you cut an array up and move it around, which the sites that I've posted in the chat, HackerRank and Code Wars, are the two you'll want to go to practice that kind of stuff. As far as I know, Manulife actually uses HackerRank in interviews. So a lot of the companies, at least the corporations, will use sites like that to test you. So practice on there and you'll be fine.
So to speak to my experiences, when I applied for my first co-op position, it was really just the interviewer just wanted to get to know me as a person, because there is that understanding that you're a co-op, you're a junior, that they can't ask you these series of complex questions because you don't have that experience yet. And for my first job right out of college, the interviewer had like 5 technical questions that they just wanted to see. And Justin, you mentioned this perfectly. It's not about getting the right answer, but it's the thought process behind it. And I might feel like a broken record for this, but it's the communication. So when I went through the interview with Jane, it was actually manipulating arrays and arrays of objects and stuff like that. And they said, well, how would you do this? And instead of just typing out the code and saying, well, there you go, I would be like, well, this is what I would do. I'd use this array function, and then I would do this, and then I would do that. And it's almost like interviewing is a skill in and of itself, that is much different than you can be a great communicator and you can be a great coder, but you might still be bad at interviews. And sometimes that's unfortunate, and it can be demoralizing if you bomb an interview. But what I have found is it's almost like this game of where you're asking permission to do something that you already know how to do, where you're like, well, I would do this to do it. And then you're like, can I do it now? And they're like, yeah, go ahead. But you just have to remember that oftentimes, like, there's that quote, we judge ourselves based on our thoughts and others based off their actions. That interviewer that's sitting across from you, or in this case in a Zoom call, they don't know what's going on in your head. And you really do have to think, or you have to be able to communicate what those thoughts are, what you're thinking, so that way the interviewer is able to understand your thought process, because that is hugely important.
And then a lot of this, you want to go?
Sorry. Yeah, just a quick note on what Chris said. I mentioned I recently changed positions. I failed at 15 interviews before getting 2 that worked. So don't let it get you down. You will fail at probably your first few. If you don't, then fantastic. But if you do, use it as a learning experience. Ask the interviewer at the end whether you got the job or not. You won't know. Just say, is there anywhere in this interview where you would suggest I work on? A lot of the times they're not sure what to say, but sometimes you'll get valuable feedback like, okay, yeah, you need to work on your processing thought or something like that.
Yeah, those are some awesome points. And it really depends on where you're at in the stage that you're finding these applications aren't going through. If it's at the resume stage, I definitely recommend, sorry to speak for you guys, and I hope this is still the case, but you folks do resume assistance. They'll review resumes and make sure that they're aligned with what people are looking for in industry. One piece of advice I always give, if you have absolutely no experience and you're applying for your first co-op position, you're wrong. You do have experience. You have 8 months of actual project work that you can talk about. You don't only have to talk about actual employment when you're talking about your resume. So with my first role after university, I talked about this really difficult course that I had at the University of Guelph. And I talked about, what my solution was to the problem that was outlined and given to us. And that helped. If you're finding that the issue is at the actual interviewing stage and not the getting your resume onto someone's desk stage, actively look out like different communication skills. We talk a lot about becoming a better communicator, which is really a lot easier said than done. So what I've found has been really easy or not really easy, really useful. As someone who doesn't naturally communicate super well, look up things like active listening and how to ask questions, open-ended questions. You're going to find if you are asking open-ended questions in interviews, asking the interviewer things like, what would a typical day look like here, is going to get you a lot further than something like, would I be using this technology? Yes or no. Asking the interviewer about why they like their company as well is a really good one. And it shows that you have that interest in not just the position, but the organization as a whole. Yeah, so those are my couple additions on top of the awesome points that Justin and Chris have already given, and it looks like Virginia is about to give.
I just have a little one. So when we look through, for co-op students, when we look through resumes, something that we're looking for is your cover letter to basically, you know, have some of the words that the job posting has in your cover letter. Talk about those things. Another thing is we like to see that you do volunteer stuff. I like to see that you know, worked with the Red Cross, or you have done something out of computer studies, but has, you know, done well on a team. We like to see that because it shows that you work well on a team and you're dedicating time outside of your studies to doing that. So that's a really important thing that we like to see, is seeing that extra step. And if it is code stuff. So I did mentoring with Ladies Learning Code and Kids Learning Code. They are great. They accept students to do mentoring. You can also go to the courses and take the courses and put that down. Be like, I went to these, you know, free courses to continue my learning, to show them that you are that person who is willing to do more learning and willing to change and willing to like make those extra steps. So those are important ones.
Yeah, the hackathons I took part in Georgian are still on my resume 4 or 5 years later. On top of that, apply to things that don't necessarily fit your title as well. Like if you are 2 years in and you see a job that wants 5 years of experience, if you apply to that, you may still get a job at that company. It'll just be a lower position than what they're advertising for if they have an opening. It's like, hey, you don't fit this position, but we have one in this level for you.
Something that I do want to say though is because you have added some extra comments to it, is if you're getting rejected at just the resume stage, you do have to also understand that from a business, oftentimes there might just be one position that's open. And right now we have one position that's open at my work right now that is open internally and externally, and we've received 38 different applications. And realistically, you can't expect a business to interview all 38. So there is some filtering that happens. And when you are still in school or a recent graduate, you know, you're competing with your classmates. You're also competing with other graduates from other colleges, graduates from universities, boot camps, and people that are self-taught. I work with some people who are entirely self-taught, and it was really hard getting your first job. And I think part of that is the interview process, even just like putting in your resume, is extremely informal. And one of the things that I would recommend is trying to make it as personal as possible. Sometimes it's reaching out to a recruiter for that company on LinkedIn, connect with them, send them a message saying, hey, I saw a job that you guys have that I'm really interested in. You know, would it be possible to have 5, 10, 15 minutes of your time? Because as a recruiter, that's their job. That's what they're paid on a daily basis to do, is to bring talent in. But the other thing that you can do is if you have connections at a company of people that already are working there, maybe they're 1, 2, 3 years, you could also maybe do like a coffee chat with them and be able to say like, hey, I'm really interested in working at your company. You know, sometimes it's, would you be able to give me a referral, or, you know, do you think I'd be a good candidate? Can you, you know, review my resume? Because they might have inside scoop of what specifically they're looking for. And, you know, while the services at Georgian are able to help tailor your resume to be better, that inside scoop is really the best bit that you can get, is knowing exactly what they want. And it's really tough to get it. And I guess just so to explain this, my last job that I got, my current one, there was 9 interviews that I had to go through in order to get my current job. And each one of those steps, it could have just been no feedback and just saying like, sorry, we're not interested in you as a candidate. And that does happen. I've gotten to the very end and they say, sorry, it's not a great fit. So just know that really the big thing I find is that you are not alone. I still sometimes get rejections when I put out a resume, and I have a fair amount of experience and I think I'm quite talented, but it happens. So just keep it up. Try to look at what maybe isn't working, and maybe you could try something where you have two versions of your resume. You hand out them at one place and the other one gets the other one, and maybe one version ends up getting more respondents back, and you try to evaluate what that is.
We often hear it's such good advice that you're offering everyone on the panel, because we hear a lot of discouragement. Job searching is hard, and being open to getting the learning out of it, asking for feedback, approaching for informational interviews or coffee chats, working your network. That's all part of resilience and landing the job in the end. It's highly qualified people might be rejected from jobs that they really want, but they still keep looking, and that ultimately leads to success. Is not to give up, keep looking, and use all of your resources and tips for help. I think that Erin had a question that she wanted to ask that she saw came up in the chat.
Yeah, we just had one question pop up in the Q&A. I think Virginia, you did. You touched on this already. Can you talk about having unrelated working experience on your resume? Would it be relevant to your co-op or full-time job interview, as long as it has technical and soft skills that can be useful? So yeah, I think Virginia, you already kind of touched on it a little bit.
I can also touch on this, as part of my resume does list that I was a clown for 15 years. And that's a really difficult thing to put on a resume, to tell someone openly that you have been a clown. But it's how I talk about being a clown that is important. So as a clown, my own business, I had to do the books. I had to make sure that I was scheduling parties, running my own events, setting up for events, takedown for events, working with children of different ages, working with parents of different ages, a whole lot of soft skills. So it's all about the skills that go with the job. And if you're like, I learned nothing from this job, then probably it's not something that's meant to be on the resume. But for myself, I learned tons of stuff. I learned tons. I did a whole bunch of things and was able to use that experience in my current position now, as I do content creating on YouTube. So working with children to building into a sort of an entertainer type career anyways, and it works.
Yeah, just to play off that, it really does look good on your resume when you have stuff like that you've gone out of your way and you've learned these soft skills. For example, like I mentioned earlier, I was a cook for 10 years. People always ask me, because they see it on LinkedIn. It's not actually on my resume, but they'll look at my LinkedIn and they'll go, well, why did you switch jobs? And I said, well, I tell them all the time, I had the time organization skills. I had the time, the team management skills. I'm organized, etc. All from that, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. I tell them I lost the heart for it. I went back at 24, graduated at 26. They almost look at that as like, okay, he has these extra skills to be able to deal with all of that. And on top of that, that also helps with customer service, the customer service side of things, because, you're dealing with people who get bad orders or, taking money, etc. That stuff all helps. I also have stuff on my resume, like I was actually part of the Makerspace presidential committee thing at one point, as well as the food locker. I ran the food locker for a semester. There's things around the school. Unfortunately, I'm not sure how many there are post-COVID, but pre-COVID, there was many things around the school that you could volunteer for. Even just being part of a group, being part of the Makerspace was something you could put on your resume, because it showed them like, hey, I liked going to this place. I was creative. I built stuff. It's these little things that just add a little personality to your resume. It's not all formal all the time. I even have a little section on my resume that says my interests. I'm a gamer. I like DIY. I play music. I sing, etc. It just helps get that little extra when they ask like, oh, what kind of a person are you? Creative type.
Yeah. To add on to that, like I have a mentee right now who has 10 years of experience in pharmaceuticals, and she's trying to break into her first development job. And she asked me this exact question: do I include my 10 years experience on my resume? And I said, of course, because as negative as it is, I don't agree with it, but employers don't like to see job gaps. So if maybe this isn't your first job, you know, maybe you're doing a career change, or maybe you have been working for some years in between high school and college, you know, employers want to know, like, what have you been doing with that time? Have you, you know, no offense, just been sitting as a bump on a log for the last 10 years? It's like, no, like I've been working, and you can see career progression that happens. You know, maybe you go from being a junior to an intermediate or senior in the pharmaceutical business, and you can see that that person is passionate and still has an invested interest in their career. And a lot of those skills are transferable. And I'll say this, I mean, in my last several jobs, the majority of the skills that I list under a job are not hard skills. They're soft skills. It's leadership, mentorship, you know, the ability to work cross team, stuff like that. And those are things that I could basically change the title of what I have right now, and you wouldn't even know that it was a development job unless if I had that there. And so I would 100% highlight seemingly unrelated work experience on your resume. Because again, the whole point of being a resume is you're trying to set yourself apart from other people. So use those differences to your advantage for sure.
If I can just pop in, I know I'm not part of the panel and not part of computer studies, but speaking, like, just to add on a little bit, Justin, I have knitting on my resume as an interest as well, because it shows detail orientation. So having your interest on your resume is actually very beneficial. And no experience is too small, I think. When it comes to volunteering, if you do, for whatever reason, have a gap in your employment, showing that you've volunteered for different things and built on soft skills, also shows. I've had in the past gaps in my own resume, just from moving and different things, and but I've always volunteered. I've always worked at improving myself during those gaps, and that's what employers want to see as well. So yeah, I just wanted to, sorry.
That's a great share. Thank you, Erin. I think we're just coming up to the 8 minutes away from the end of this event. So I'd like to ask everyone one more question. Erin, as long as do we have any more in the hopper, or shall I go with our last question?
Yeah, let's go with the closer. I've answered all of the questions, I believe, that are there. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll ask everyone on the panel just one more, and we'll go around table with this one. We're coming out, hopefully, fingers crossed, of a almost, it's about 1.5 years. We're going to come up to maybe 2 years of a global pandemic. What is the one piece of advice you would give to our students as they get ready to job search in a world that's going to be in recovery? So what piece of advice would you give to our students who pick up their socks and job search, either for student or graduate jobs in the post-pandemic industry?
It's going to be difficult. Along with COVID, there's all the economic restrictions, and a lot of people have lost their jobs and are looking for new jobs, and that includes people in the tech sector. One thing I would say is a good thing to highlight is that it's like a silver lining on this pandemic and kind of how it's affected our lives is you have gained a lot of tech skills that are more the kind of the bridge between soft and tech skills. You know how to talk to people on Zoom now. You know how to make sure that your voice is coming fine through your microphone. You have those skills when it comes to that learning and communication technology. So that's one skill you have. Another skill that you've gained likely is time management skills. It's way harder to kind of be in charge of your own schoolwork when you're not actually at the school. Like one of the things that I found really helpful whenever I was struggling to start on a project when I was at Georgian was I would go to campus and I would find an empty room somewhere or a room where there were other people in my program, and I would just start working. I wouldn't necessarily, interact with people that were in my program if I was really kind of in the zone and working. But there's that sort of accountability piece that you get with coming to campus. If you aren't on campus, you don't have as strong of that accountability piece. So that's something you've had to develop and set for yourself as well. You've had to make sure that your projects get done. There's no one, sitting next to you who's asking like, hey, did you submit the project last night? Like, it was really hard, so I wanted to get it out of the way. And then you kind of freak out a little bit because you haven't started, and that kind of gets you in gear. There are skills that you have gained, and I think it's really important to remember as well that it's going to be tough. Try not to get discouraged. I know I can say try not to get discouraged, but that doesn't really mean anything. You're going to have some harder days. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Make sure you keep eating, go outside, get some sunshine. The job search itself is a job, and make sure you have that break time after.
What I would say for myself is I think what COVID has really shown a lot of people is that nothing is permanent. A lot of people had a way of working that was, pretty typical for the last however many 100 years, where you commuted to the office, and then COVID shook things up, and the world is going to permanently change. I am 100% remote after COVID because, well, my company is in Utah. That's going to be one heck of a remote or a commute if I have to do that. And like what I feel is oftentimes, the situation that you're in sometimes isn't necessarily what you might want, and understanding that it's not always going to be permanent. There are lots of things that you can do to change. And I switched jobs twice during COVID. And there were, it was at a time where there was a lot of uncertainty for other areas. And I was able to make a upwards jump twice. And knowing that there's, our field of development in general is always going to be in demand. I think it's very obvious how reliant we are on technology. And so when you're job seeking and you end up finding yourself in a position that maybe it doesn't interest you, you realize, oh, I don't like back end, I'm much more front end, or vice versa. Maybe try to make those changes at your work, but just know that you can go elsewhere, and that's totally okay. Because I feel like at the end of the day, like if you make all the money in the world, but you're not happy at what you do, like what's the point, So that's what I feel. It's just, I feel COVID has made that much more obvious that happiness is much more important than the job that you work, because there are people who, were working for 20, 30 years and then got laid off because of COVID. And I don't know, that's my feelings is be able to take advantage of that and look out for yourself.
Yeah, as for myself, I completely agree with everything they've said so far. As an advocate for the mental health side of things, though, myself I would say definitely keep an eye on your mental state. For myself, I didn't like going to the office every day, but it definitely wasn't as bad as being where I'm stuck currently. This is my entire apartment. It's a 20 by 20 box. If you live like that, some people just can't do it. But the overarching narrative here is definitely keep an eye on your mental health. Don't burn yourself out. If you find a job has not that great of a work-life balance, make sure you either bring that up to your manager or, like Chris said, find something that fits you a little better. There will always be tech work. Use things as springboards if you have to. For example, with my current position, I reached as far as I could go where I was, so I used that as a springboard and went somewhere else. My manager, I expected him to be sad or mad or any negative emotion, but he actually praised me for the fact that that's exactly what he wants to see with his employees. People will not be mad at you for doing that kind of stuff. You're doing it to better your own career, and if they can't see that, then that's unfortunate. But between that and the mental health aspect, those are the number one things, especially right now, that I think people should keep an eye on, because people don't know about that stuff and they won't go get help if they don't understand it.
And last words to Virginia.
Last words. My last words are also going to be on the mental health side of things. If you are struggling, talk to someone. We have a great group of people at the college who are there to talk to. If you are stressed and overwhelmed with schoolwork, if you are stressed and overwhelmed with your job search, go talk to somebody about it. If you don't have friends around, that's like, it could be because of COVID and everybody's really far away, or maybe you're in different time zones. Go talk to someone, talk to a mentor, go on Discord, find someone to just say hey to, make a new friend. Online, everything's online right now, so it's a little bit easier, and people are more accepting of online friendships and the online world. So when I was growing up, having an online friend was the weirdest thing in the world. Now I'm like, I can talk to somebody in New Brunswick. My best friends are out in New Brunswick, and we can just have Snapchats. So, and make sure that you're checking in with your friends and, asking them how their job search is going. And if their job search is going really sucky, be like, hey, I had some tough times with that as well, or my job search went really well. Maybe you want to apply at this place as well. So it's really, I really want to make sure that you guys are doing like, okay, up in here and up in here, because those two spots are going to be what drives you to actually, go get that job, or to finish all your courses, or to, get honors and get on the dean's list. So just, yeah, that's my final thoughts.
And as much as it is a rat race, you help each other. That's another big thing. Like, if it wasn't for Chris and Michael in my year, there's a lot of things that they helped me with that I would not have been able to get by without them. So you're there to help each other as well. So be sure to do that.
Wise words. Panelists, thank you. On behalf of all the participants in today's event and the college, just for your ongoing support as alumni, I want to thank you, Justin Sheik, Chris Naismith, Virginia Barlow, and Michael Joyce, for your time today. We so appreciate it. So many wonderful nuggets you're offering our students. So thank you very much. We hope you have a lovely rest of your evening, and we can't wait to see you again at an event at some time in the future. Take care, everyone, and good night.
Take care.
Good night. Thank
Take
you.
care.
Have an awesome evening.